Somebody asked me in the comments, like, what are my views in regards to Western occultism in relation to traditions like Palo Mayombe or Ifa, Orisha, and so forth. And being a Kimbizero and coming from the lineage in which um, the magician Andreas Petit uh, founded. Andreas Petit was a ceremonial magician, but he basically favored the Palo traditions and so forth. And the way I see Western occultism is a form of mystical arts. A lot of people in the African traditional religious community I see, they try to downplay Western occultism as if, it's some type of fluff. And I admit, today you got a lot of people that are out here practicing rituals and ceremonies and things of that nature. But one thing that they don't understand about Western occultism is this: the first goal of Western occultism is to come into conscious communion with the holy guardian angel. And as a Luciferian, we would often use the terminology of coming in contact with one's daemon, one's higher self. In Ifa, we call this the Ori. Okay, and there's actually a shrine that allows Babalao or a Ifa initiate or priest to feed his or her Ori. Okay, and there's also ways in other traditions like Palo where you can clean your Ori and feed your Ori as well. But in ceremonial magic, we don't have those particular tools to work with, and therefore it is handled on a more mystical level. So one of the first things to, the first steps to actually becoming an adept of Western occultism is to become a mystic. And what is a mystic? A mystic is an individual who works toward creating a conscious communion with the divine. The divine being whether his or her higher self, or the divine being the actual um, universal consciousness, what people call God or what have you. So when an individual comes in contact with their higher self, and through meditation and through mystical practices and so forth, then they're able to operate consciously as a spirit, opposed to being a individual who is engulfed in their ego, where their mind is actually glued to the physical form, where they see themselves as a personality, where they see themselves as a physical body with a mind, versus seeing themselves as pure awareness who possesses a body and a mind. A lot of people out here think that they are the body and they think that they are the mind. And this is the delusion that we get caught up in on a day-to-day basis. But the reality is that we're all conscious, sentient beings of pure awareness. And the ceremonial magician works on a consistent level in a mystical way in order to come into conscious communion with his higher self. And by coming in conscious communion with his higher self, this individual is able to perform as a spirit in such a way that they can cause things to change on a physical, mental, or causal plane of existence. Okay? So by doing so, when the person performs their rituals and ceremonies and things of that nature in Western occultism, they are able to get results as long as they're able to do these rituals while they are in conscious communion with their higher self. Meaning, these people need to be able to go into a state of spiritual or magical trance. And if that individual cannot go into a state of spiritual or magical trance, then for most part, they are performing empty rituals and ceremonies. And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to see any results. So, being a ceremonial magician, practicing Western occultism, being also affiliated with traditions like Palo Mayombe or Ifa or Orisha or even Voodoo is is something that can be done. But I always suggest that these things are kept separate. You know what I mean? Like your mystical practice has nothing to do with Palo Mayombe. Your Luciferian practice has nothing to do with Palo Mayombe. Your Hermetic practice has nothing to do with Palo Mayombe. Your Kabbalistic practice has nothing to do with Palo Mayombe. This is something that you choose to practice on your own for your own self development and your own self empowerment, but it has nothing to do with the tradition of Palo Mayombe. So when you see people like myself talking about, oh yeah, I'm a Luciferian, it does not mean that I'm combining Luciferian concepts, ideologies, and principles and practices with Palo Mayombe. It means that I practice Luciferianism completely separate from Palo Mayombe, because Luciferianism to me is a mystical practice. It is a practice about becoming in conscious communion with my higher self. And by coming in conscious communion with my higher self, it makes me a better Tata, it makes me a better Babalao or a priest of whatever tradition that I choose to be initiated into, because it gives me a stronger connection to the spiritual world and therefore the spirits of that particular tradition. And this is what magicians like Andreas Petit were able to do, and why they had the type of power of an Eliphas Levi, or even more so stronger than an Aleister Crowley, because they also have the Palo spirits to call upon, but then they also had the strong will and volition of a ceremonial magician to be able to penetrate the mental, the astral planes of existence in order to cause change. And basically, that's all that magic is. Magic is the ability to cause change in the the physical, mental, and causal planes of existence in accordance with one's will. And this is why Aleister Crowley coined phrases or made popular phrases such as "Do as thou wilt" should be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love as I will. Now, in that particular phrase or oxum, he's actually talking about sex magic. But the first part of that particular oxum, "Do as thou wilt," shall be the whole of the law. Do as thou wilt means to do as thou will, as the higher self. Do as whatever you do it with the will of the higher self. And whenever you do things with the will of the higher self, you are doing things with the will of God. You are doing things with the will of the divine. And the four qualities of the divine are omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and the all loving or all encompassing energy of the universe. So, any individual who is operating from the higher self is operating from the standpoint of godhood, because he is now in conscious communion with his godlike self. And this is what Jesus even was saying in the Bible when he said, I and the Father are one. He was saying that basically he was in a conscious communion with a higher self, and he was in a conscious communion with the universal self. Okay? And this is what happens with all of your magicians who are adepts. There's a difference between being an initiate of ceremonial magic, Western occultism, and there's a difference between being an adept. An initiate is an individual who is working towards conscious communion with his holy guardian angel or his daemon guide or so forth. While an adept is an individual who has already achieved that mastery and is now operating and working from the standpoint of his higher self and performing magical rituals and ceremonies with a complete efficiency, because this individual has already connected with their higher self. Now, combine that with a practice such as Palo Mayombe. Imagine being able to go in front of an Nganga and go into a magical trance in which you are and connected with your higher self, and you begin to start communicating with the Nganga, and you begin to start communicating with the spirit. Imagine the efficacy and the efficiency of such a process if an individual Tata or Yaya is able to do that and be able to cause things to manifest at a much faster rate. So it's not to say that an individual cannot utilize this particular type of Ache in their Palo Mayombe or Ifa or Orisha practice, but the actual techniques and everything that goes involved in developing this type of ability has nothing to do with Palo Mayombe per se, because as far as I have learned, as far as I have communicated with many Tatas, I've never heard a Tata talk about going into magical trance. We talk about a particular trance in regards to using Nsunga, Vatiti Mensu, and things of that nature, espiritismo practices and whatnot. But when it comes to actual meditative practices where individuals are exploring the mystical arts in order to develop things on an individual and solitary level without any tools or any spirits or anything to help them, I haven't heard of that yet. I don't rarely ever hear of a Tata or a Palero or even a Babalao talk about meditation. Everybody talks about divination, sacrifices, offerings, and bows, and so forth. I never hear people talk about meditation. I hear people talk about prayer, but I don't hear people talk about meditation. I never hear people talking about deep trance states of awareness and so forth. And I'm not saying that to say that these things do not exist in these traditions. I'm saying that I don't hear people talking about them. So what that tells me is that these things are not popular in the community in regards to being able to work with the spirit. And what does this also tell me is that because individuals become so dependent upon shrines and offerings and sacrifices that they negate to be able to develop their own spiritual faculties to such a degree that they don't even need a shrine. You see, all these people that I see walking around bragging, saying, beating their chest, I'm initiated in this, I'm initiated in that, I got this spirit, I got that spirit, but it's still a shrine. And if you did not have that shrine, you would not have that power. If somebody took those shrines away from you, you would be powerless. And that in itself lets me know that it is very much a limited idea to think that your power is connected to that of a shrine, something that is temporary. When an individual in Western occultism does not depend on shrines, the only shrine that that individual depends on is his or her own mind. And by developing his or her own mind and increasing the ache of his or her own mind, that individual is able to perform what we call supersensory perceptions, or what you all call miracles, or whatever people want to call, such as magic, to be able to perform feats that will appear to be miraculous, you know? So when it comes to Western occultism and traditions, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, because I do admit that the traditions and the shrines and the offerings and things of that nature are very useful and helpful and helping us in our everyday life. But when it comes to spiritual evolution and being able to evolve into a level of enlightenment beyond transcending this physical world, I suggest that people also become involved in the mystical arts and begin to start meditating, pick up a mystical skill, a mystical tradition, and embrace it. I don't care if it's Buddhism, I don't care if it's Sufism, I don't care if it's Kabbalah, I don't care if it's Vedanta, I don't care if it's Gnosticism, whatever it is. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think Andreas Petit was a Gnostic. He was a part of the some Gnostic society that was connected to the church. The Gnostics are the mystics of the Christian tradition. The Sufis are the mystics of the Islamic tradition. The Kabbalists are the mystics of the Hebrew tradition, and so forth. So, anybody who is a part of these traditions, I definitely encourage you to go out and become a part of some type of mystical society in which you can learn to develop your higher self and not just become dependent upon a shrine. I hope that this video was informative to you. I hope that it helped open your eyes to some things in regards to the connection between Western occultism, Palo Mayombe, Ifa, Orisha, Santeria, whatever. And like I said, do your due diligence and see what you can find. Peace.